Hey everybody, Max Boltman here alongside the Athletics' Corey Pronman, Scott Wheeler, and Flow Hockey's Chris Peters for another episode of the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series, our live reaction to the 2026 NHL Draft Lottery, and it is a doozy. The Toronto Maple Leafs are picking first overall, Corey. They pretty much had to have it. If they weren't going to win the lottery, they were likely going to forfeit this pick to Boston as a condition in the Brandon Carlo trade, and they move all the way up to number one.
Yeah, obviously a very interesting draft lottery for them. They could have lost the pick altogether. They could have picked five, but they end up picking at the one spot. And the incoming management group get to make a very interesting decision here on what direction they want to go in to start the next iteration of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And there's so many angles we can discuss now with this pick. Obviously this is a team that's thought they were in win now mode, but they weren't this past year. Does that lend you to take players who you think might be more NHL ready than not? This is also an organization that has seen issues with depth over the years, and now like at the premium positions at center, John Tavares is getting older. They've been dying for premium defense talent for a long time. And there's a lot of really good defensemen in this year's draft. And of course, and I'm sure we'll be beating this drum a little bit, they've built their team in a very specific way over the last decade. They had when they were making their great regular season runs and obviously their unsuccessful playoff runs, they had these 3-4 really high-end skill guys in their lineup, really dangerous power play, but lacked depth and lacked the ability to play at even strength consistently in the playoffs. Do they turn to a 5'11 winger and someone like a Gavin McKenna, who I think you can make reasonable analogies to Mitch Marner at the same age? You could probably argue Marner a little bit better, two-way player. McKenna is probably even a higher level of skill than Marner, but it would basically be trying to build in a very similar fashion. You're envisioning a power play with Matthews and Nylander and McKenna. And that being the crux of how you generate your offense. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do. And there's a lot of pressure on this team. And as well, they don't have a first-round pick for 2 more years after this. So this pick is, safe to say, it's extremely important they get this one right.
Very important.
And
how
Max,
about the last 24 hours in Toronto? You've got the awkward, uncomfortable, testy moments yesterday in the press conference. You're entering into the organization staring down potentially losing a 6th or 7th overall pick to a division rival. And now a day later, Matt Sundin, a former first overall pick, though not to the Leafs, is sitting on TV accepting basically the best news imaginable on day 2 of his job.
I find it amazing that the Maple Leafs won the draft lottery this year for the reasons Scott just mentioned and because of what Corey just talked about. We're talking about 2 marginal, like wings that have holes in their game. It's not like, listen, Gavin McKenna is a superstar talent. There's a lot of things he does offensively well, but there are holes in the game. And the thing is that, this is not a year the Maple Leafs are getting a no-doubter when they had Austin Matthews. This is not a year where they're getting that. And it's kind of funny that we're talking about, 2 kind of wings that, and I'd say Stenberg is the more competitive between the 2, gets a little bit more to the interior than McKenna does. But I just find it fascinating that, the Maple Leafs win the draft lottery this year, and at the top of the lineup is 2 guys that either could be the heir apparent to Mitch Marner, and we saw how badly they missed him last year, but now, like, honestly, is this the best outcome for Toronto to win it this year, essentially?
Well, that I think is really interesting, Chris, because when we talk about the Marner factor to all of this, right? There's one part of me that says, well, I think that their build had them being a consistent 100-point team, and if you take the playmaking winger and you bump him down from what Mitch Marner was making to an entry-level contract, it actually does leave you a lot of room to address some of the deficiencies the Toronto Maple Leafs previously had. The issue is, Corey, is that I don't think Gavin McKenna can step in on day 1 and be Mitch Marner. He should hope to be Mitch Marner by year 3, by year 4. We've seen players like Jack Hughes, like Alexis Lafreniere, and those are, two different end products, but harsh transitions to the NHL game. Gavin McKenna played college hockey this year, I think, to help himself with that transition. He got better as the year went along, but is he ready to step in on day one and be a difference maker for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
It's a great question. I think McKenna's biggest advocates will point to Jack Hughes as probably a median case development path where it could take a little bit of time. Mind you, he's I think like 10 months older than Hughes was going into his draft, so he's a little bit further along. I think the people who like McKenna are thinking maybe he could be somewhere between like 45 to 55 points next year in the NHL, which would be a really good player.
Yeah.
But obviously it's not Marner. And you're hoping by year 2, year 3, he can get to that level of offense. But it's a fair question. The other part of that too is even though he could step in, and I think Stenberg has kind of indicated he wants to come to North America, he wants to compete for an NHL job, is these other players like Caleb Malhotra and Chase Reid and Albert Smits and Carson Karls and Keaton Verhoff are all very likely going to play college hockey next year. So these non-wingers are at least a year away, if not 2 years away, from meaningfully helping the Toronto Maple Leafs if they were to go in a different direction. And I mean, Scott lives in that city. He can give me an idea if I'm mistaken, but this doesn't seem like the most patient fan base, the most patient organization to say, we got the number 1 pick. Just, he's going to go do the Owen Power route, though. He's going to take another year in college, and maybe by year 2, year 3, he's going to start playing real minutes for us.
No, that's not. It doesn't seem like the most patient ownership now either. There's been a change in ownership in Toronto in recent years, and Rogers has acquired more and more of the stake. They will soon have 100% control over MLSE. And from ownership on down, it seems like priority number 1 is making sure that they don't lose Austin Matthews and William Nylander in the coming years. And that means pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's, I think, what John Chaika's marching orders have been here as well. And that's Sundin. The message from everybody on down is we've got to get this back on track. I believe Austin turns 29 in September. Nylander's already 30. Those are your 2 guys. So you now have another piece of the puzzle to pair with them. It's ironic after all these years of talking about the core 4 that we now might have some different version of the core 4 here in Toronto. But the reality is that it's go time. And so I think there is something to not wanting to wait 2, 3, 4 players. It probably takes a defenseman just out of the equation altogether with what we've seen from young defensemen trying to break into the league in recent years. It's a lot easier to do it as a forward. And it probably takes players like Caleb Malhotra and guys who are on different paths than maybe a Stenberg or a McKenna are who want to come over and play in the NHL next year. We know that Stenberg hasn't signed his contract, hasn't re-upped his contract, I should say, with Frölunda. And those 2 names in particular, I think, are what you zero in on from an outside perspective, not knowing anything about the way that the Leafs brass are thinking right now. And then on top of that, they have said that Leach is going to run the draft board. So this is very much, we'll see how true that is, but this is very much in the hands of an amateur scouting staff that are also awaiting contracts in many cases. And there's a lot at play with the Leafs amateur department and decisions that they need to make on all sorts of staff. And now they go into the draft with a critical decision for the next decade plus of this organization.
My question, and this goes to like what Max just said too, is if McKenna comes in, he's like a 70, 80 point guy right away. That changes things a little bit. But if he comes in, he's like let's say a 45 to 50 point, winger, does that really move the needle for Toronto? And does that really change the core issues that we're talking about here in terms of, near-term contention?
And am I alone in thinking that even 40 or 50 points might feel optimistic?
No.
Well, if they
I think he's going to have a really tough time in the league next year. Like similar to what Jack Hughes went through. What did Jack have? Like 26 points or something?
It wasn't good.
Jack Hughes didn't get to ride shotgun with Austin Matthews still on the top power play unit.
No.
Is he? Yeah. Is that going to be where you put him? I mean, I think, and so with all that in mind too, we're talking about this, and if it wasn't the Leafs, I feel like we wouldn't really necessarily be having this discussion. But I threw it out on Twitter, probably trolling a little bit, but still thinking about it a little bit more. Is how
Don't say
far
trade the
away?
pick.
No, I'm not saying trade the pick. No, that wouldn't go over well. But how far away are the D from McKenna and Stenberg in your guys' eyes? How far away are those players? Because Chaika said recently, yesterday in one of his many interviews that, didn't, where he wasn't personally attacked, was we need to look at the blue line. And that's anybody that with eyes can look at the Toronto and say, we need help on D. Is there any world in which that is an alternative option for, and this is just a devil's advocate thing. I'm not saying the Leafs should do this, but is there a world where that makes sense to either of you guys?
I think it does. I think those D-men are there's some couple of those D-men that are pretty much a tie with McKenna for me, or a margin, or a half step below him.
Yeah.
Depending on your evaluation of them, and maybe Toronto, whether Toronto agrees or disagrees with that, obviously is the more critical factor. But Max said earlier, they could always just take McKenna and use that and go out and get a D, and externally. I'm not sure who that would be. It doesn't seem like there's some premier defenseman in free agency they can just go after.
No.
And one would argue that, and Chaika has actually said this when he was the Arizona GM, that he looks at the draft for what kind of pieces he can get. He looks at what's harder to get on the open market when he was talking about what he would like to draft. So that could be a variable in trying to figure out who the first pick is.
That's the thing. Go ahead, Scott.
No, I was just going to say my worry with that, if I'm sitting in that chair, would be that you don't know. It's the same conversation we always have about drafting for need. Let's say Chase Reid and these guys are 2-3 years away. You don't know what your needs are going to be 2-3 years from now. They could be completely different. And you're going to have 2 or 3 free agencies between now and then. You're going to have 2 or 3 trade deadlines between now and then. It could take, even after those guys break in 2.5 years, it could take them time to establish themselves. With some of these D, you're often talking 4 or 5 years down the line before they're making a real impact in the league. Even Lane Hudson, it took him 3 years before he was impacting the league. Well, not 3 years, but pretty close. Simon Edvinsson, you go down the list. It takes time with those guys, and I don't know whether they have that. And I don't know whether they can risk playing that long game with hypothetical needs in the here and now. Just take the player that can help you sooner. And if you think that player is Gavin or Ivar or whoever, or if it's a defenseman, make that calculus on the defenseman. But it feels to me like that player probably wouldn't be one of the D.
I think Chris's point is more like how when baseball tie goes to the runner. Is it if it's tie or close to a tie between the winger and the D, or the winger and the center, but let's say it's one of the D, that I think there'd be a really strong case to take the defenseman. And I would agree with that, and that's how I kind of view the situation now. I know, Scott, you just released a board now. You don't view it that way. You view there's a distinction between McKenna, Stenberg, and the rest of the class. So, and I think
there's some risk in
that's the critical
each of those
question.
D. Yeah.
I mean, there's risk in all the players. I mean, there's no Schaefer this year. Every player has holes this year that I've seen anyways. But I think that's the critical question, is what's the gap between those players? That's, I think, the most interesting question. Not, obviously I think McKenna and Stenberg are more likely to produce in the near term.
All right, let's transition this away from the Leafs. We'll have a lot more time over the next month and a half to talk about the number 1 pick. The number 2 pick is arguably just as interesting here, because at the top of the show, I said if they didn't win the lottery, they were probably giving this pick to Boston. That is because the San Jose Sharks won the 2nd spot in the lottery, jumping up in the draft. So they're going to pick 2nd. That would have pushed the Leafs down to 6 otherwise, at least 6 otherwise, depending on who had won instead of them. But the San Jose Sharks are a team that has a lot going for them already. Of course, they have Macklin Celebrini, they have Will Smith, they have Sam Dickinson on the back end, but they do kind of lack that running mate for him, that more offensive defenseman. And at the 2 spot, that's a pretty good place to find one, Corey.
Yeah, and when you think of their power play now long term with Celebrini, with Will Smith, you figure Michael Misa is going to get there at some point. Obviously, I don't know if Chernyshev a top power play guy or not, but obviously he had a very impressive year this year in San Jose. It does feel like they're in a situation here where they have needed a premium young defenseman, a guy with high-end skill for quite a few years now into this rebuild. And it does feel like the stars have kind of aligned here at the 2 spot. And I don't know who that player is going to be. I don't know whether it's Keaton Verhoff or Chase Reid or Albert Smith or Carson Carls or Daxon Rudolph. I think there's a variety of ways they could go, but it does feel like this is their time here to get that defenseman and to really assemble one of the most promising young cores I can remember over the last 10, 15 years. Doesn't always work out. We raved about Buffalo's core for so long until it finally kind of turned into something. But it's also, if they leave here with a Chase Reid, you could kind of look at them in the same way you looked at a really young Colorado Avalanche organization 10 years ago and be like, hey, this is a lot of talent. And if it goes well, like there's a lot of really good things that can happen in San Jose.
Is it Reid with a bullet? Like, is Reid the top D with a bullet here? I mean, there's a cluster of really good players: Carson Carls, Daxon Rudolph, Albert Smits, Keaton Verhoff, of course. Like, there's a big group of D, but we're talking, it seems like, mostly about Reid.
No, I don't think it's him with a bullet, but I think he and Rudolph are the 2 best candidates to run a power play. I don't think anyone here envisions Sam Dickinson running a first power play unit in the NHL. I think even there's some questions if he's running a second power play unit in the NHL right now. So I think if you're looking for that guy who could be a 50, 60 point heavy minutes defenseman, I feel like all signs are pointing towards Reid right now, but it's not a sure thing.
Yeah, I would go with Reid as well. For me, that seems to make the most sense. I think he checks the most boxes for you. The Sharks are going to be a team that's going to beat a lot of teams in transition with the way that they're set up, and you need really good mobile defensemen that can move pucks. And I think that's what Reid does. I think he's also a guy that's going to be involved in the rush. And, I just think that he is a really nice fit for them. I think this is a good situation for San Jose to find themselves in, where the pressure is off a little bit for that first overall pick. I think a lot of people have said in the past, I'd rather pick 2 or 3 just to have some of those decisions made for me, because there are tough decisions to be made. But I do think that Chase Reid checks the most boxes for me among those guys. I think a lot of these defensemen in our grouping with Reid, I do feel like there's been at least for me, a little bit of separation between him and the others. I think each of them have holes, and Reid does as well. But to me, I just think I look at the way that the Sharks are being built, and I see a hand-to-glove fit with that particular player.
Is there much difference between him and Levshunov? Same point?
That's a great question.
I think he thinks it better.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously distinctions.
Already,
it's not an overlap, but there's some rhymes there, I would say, between the big right shot, toolsy, offensive tilted defenseman.
Yeah, and I think I'd lean that Chase's overall skill level is a cut, like a slight cut above. But not, I think there's a lot there. And his defensive urgency is a little better too. So I think that's
fair.
That helps. But I mean, I do think that this is, like, the Sharks are in a really good spot here. Like, say you go Stenberg, you go with one of these D, I think, heck, you even go Malhotra. Like, I feel like there are so many good options at 2. And I actually like all of them a little bit better just for where the Sharks are right now than I did McKenna in that spot.
I think the ultimate question is, does McKenna or Stenberg make the most sense for San Jose at 2? Because they're going to have an opportunity to take one of them.
To me, Will Smith is close enough to being McKenna that I don't think you need to double up with that. Stenberg could bring a little more kind of that like inner driving skilled winger, but I think the need at D is enough that if it's even close, I think you got to take the D for San Jose. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, let's go through the other top teams here, because pretty much everybody slid as a result of the very top teams slid because Toronto and San Jose jump up. So Vancouver's going to pick at 3, Chicago at 4, the New York Rangers 5, Calgary 6, Seattle 7, Winnipeg 8, the Florida Panthers pick at 9. Do they make that pick? We'll see. Nashville at 10, St. Louis has 11 and 15, New Jersey 12, the Islanders 13, Columbus 14, Washington 16. Those big markets in that 3 to 5 cluster, Scott, Vancouver, Chicago, New York, who should be the most disappointed at how this shook out for them?
If you're the Vancouver Canucks, I think you have to be at least a little disappointed. forget how close the players are at the top. Just being able to control the board is so valuable. And when you're in it, and from a sales pitch, being able to sell a first overall pick, if you're that ownership, if you're that organization, sell that hope, I think is losing out on that piece of the puzzle. Whether you like the player as much at 3 as you did at 1, that hurts. Like the Blackhawks are fine. The Blackhawks are going to get another important piece to add to their ridiculous number of important pieces that they have to figure out here over the next few years. I don't have much sympathy for sort of the situation that they're in. But yeah, I don't know. I do feel a little bit for the Canucks organization. I'm sure that fan base was at the edge of their seat watching the balls go, and you saw their odds shot up a couple of times during each of the draws where it felt like it was going to go their way, and then it doesn't go their way, and now they're going to get a very good player at 3, whether it's Caleb Malhotra and that sort of center to build around, or another one of those D that we just talked about off the top, or another Swede in Ivar Stenberg. There are great options there. I think we all like all of those players, and maybe even are partial to them in Corey's case to Gavin McKenna. But they could have sold Gavin McKenna. Gavin could have been something for them to get sort of really galvanized around and get excited about. Criticisms aside of the player, it's just that piece of it. It's got to be a bit of a sour feeling for that organization, top down, and now they've got to figure out all sorts of stuff there, including hiring their next general manager.
Yeah, and I feel for Vancouver as well, but I also think that there's potentially a blessing in disguise here. Of the teams that we're going to pick first, I really feared Vancouver for Gavin McKenna's sake, just because I felt like he was going to be needed too much there, whereas now he's going to potentially go into a situation where he's a little more insulated, which I think is better for a player like him, and will help ease him and maybe set him up better for success. What I think for Vancouver here is now you're in a position where I think you've got a number of good options available to you. They're not the best option necessarily, but they're still going to be pretty good. And this is a position where I wonder if a Caleb Malhotra makes sense. I think as a guy now, is he as exciting enough? Is he going to get you out of your seat the same way that maybe a Stenberg could? I don't know, but I just watched him throughout the playoffs, and I saw a player that potentially could be a cornerstone piece for a team that is maybe not the star, but a guy that is going to be a pretty significant piece for a good team. I think he's a very complete player. I think he plays the game at a pretty high level. That's a player that I would look at and say, hey, this guy could be part of our new identity. This guy could be part of our future. He's one of those players I feel strongly would be able to handle that. Obviously, there's the familial, a relationship with the organization. I think that's a player. He told us a long time ago, like that was his team. That was the team that he loved as a kid. I think that he would relish that opportunity. So I don't know if that's going to end up being the pick. I don't know if that makes the most sense for them, but I do think that Caleb Malhotra, we start having that conversation right there at 3.
I will say, like, they already have Braden Coots, and I think Malholtra's a better player than Coots. But if you don't think Malhotra can be a 1C, and maybe you do, I mean, he's had a phenomenal playoffs there. Like, they're early enough in their rebuild. They're going to be picking high. I feel confident in saying a lot of times they're going to have other chances to get the center. They might be one of the rare teams that I would endorse saying just take whoever your best player is, regardless of what you see as positional value, because you're going to have a lot of cracks at positional value, I think. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I also think like who they're getting at 3 is not substantially much different than who they're beginning at 1 or 2. Like the only teams that saw massive deltas today in terms of was San Jose and frankly Toronto not falling out of the top 5. Like those are the two obvious because they were the 2 lottery winners. But in terms of the most significant things that happened to organizations today, that was it. Like, yeah, it'll suck if they don't get McKenna, but we're literally having this Stenberg versus McKenna debate, and there seems like a pretty decent chance Stenberg could be there at 3.
Yes.
Yes.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Very real chance.
So, like, I don't know. I think they're fine. I mean, or at least no less fine than they were 24 hours ago.
For sure. I think most years, if we were debating a 6'3" two-way center and a 5'11" scoring winger, I think most of us are pounding the table for the 6'3" two-way center. I think Vancouver's like kind of uniquely suited to be able to say, you know what, you need talent, period. Just take it where it's there.
Right. Obviously, there's other variables other than that to consider, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think that's kind of interesting debates that we're going to have in the coming weeks here is where are the lines in the draft? When we get to our consensus board, what we're going to do in a few weeks, I think trying to tier this draft is going to be a very fascinating exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. We will have a lot more to come, including a full kind of lottery. Once we've had a minute to sit with our thoughts, we'll do that. We'll do it again later this week for the Friday show. So we'll have more there. But for now, that's going to do it for us. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell to stay informed and catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And in the meantime, you can join our Discord community. We'll see you there.